The idea of equity funding, that is going to someone who will give you money, not as a grant in a nonprofit kind of way, but will become a kind of partner in your project and put up money, and on the basis that if this project makes money back, they're going to share in that revenue. That's a little bit of a newer concept. My idea is, not necessarily to name names because I couldn't of who the rich people are that might want to fund your project. But how do you handle that relationship, and what does that look like?
Dan at Impact Partners, who Impact had funded our previous film, or the finishing money, and Dan Kogan managed to find somehow through some strange connection a guy in New Jersey who loved mixed martial arts fighting, which the film was about, and we met him at a diner. And he was like, I want to invest in movies. And he had never invested in a movie before. And I showed him some footage on an iPhone, and he gave us $100,000, which was probably the best $100,000 he's ever spent. And he may never see a return like that on a movie again. He's investing in more movies. I mean, it's really hard for these people to make their money back. He took a huge leap of faith, but I mean, he kind of knew. And I think, and it was kind of great with him. He turned out to be a wonderful guy, and really loved the film and loved the sport that it was about, and turned out to be a great advocate. But I think he really believed in what it was about, and that's all that he needed. And just had a tremendous leap, sight unseen. And we showed him. I think we showed him the first rough cut, and we showed him the finished stuff. He's actually got his money back, plus his 15 back, plus he's well into getting his 30% back because we had a great deal with Showtime. That's very, very rare. And I mean, Jenny's right to point out, with investors, they need to know, especially if it's a social interest film, they're incredibly hard to sell in this market. Maybe, what do you think, like 8 films a year are going to do the kind of numbers that are going to see a return. So, their heart really needs to be in the right place.
We have investors who tend to be philanthropists, some who had some background in film, some who just cared about certain social issues, who we've brought together, and they join Impact Partners as a member, and we give them the opportunity to invest in the films that we'd like to support. So we review 400 or 500 films a year, and then about 12 of them we present to this group of investors, and they can individually opt in or opt out.
I do think that people like Impact do a great job because not only are they managing the filmmakers and making sure that the investor gets what they paid for, but also managing the expectations of the investors and when we've worked with them, it's been amazing because you never feel the investor breathing down your neck or, people, especially when they get that EP credit, they want to be involved in the process, which is great, but it's also very, very time consuming.
Nobody, I think, is going to invest in social interest documentaries to make a lot of money, but our goal as a fund is to average at recoupment so that the fund can be a bit self-sustaining and that the investors will continue to put their money into these films. A lot of philanthropists who care about social issues have had experiences where they've given grants to films and the films have never been finished because the rest of the funding wasn't made available for the filmmakers, and have been sort of burned by those experiences. So what Impact Partners is doing is kind of being the middleman who work with the filmmakers and know the industry well and can advise the investors on what makes sense.
If someone in this room meets someone in a diner, wants to give them $100,000, what would be like, here are the basic steps you should take?
I think the first thing is to just have a conversation with that person very clearly about what they want in return. And, if what they're looking for in return is the potential recoupment and profit, then you have to have this conversation about what's realistic to expect from that and what would need to happen in order to get to that stage, where you need to sell the film. And you have to have thought through your distribution to be able to, I think, convincingly explain to somebody else. And then what else they want, because people often do want credit. And, my personal feeling is that credit's cheap, so give it. But you also, I sometimes see Kickstarter campaigns where people are offering, EP credits for $2,000 or $3,000, and if there's the opportunity,
it's too cheap.
Yes, it could be too cheap because then if somebody else comes along later who wants to give you more money and they see there are already 4 EP credits for people that gave $2,000, they're not. So you have to just think a little bit strategically about your credits and go into any conversation with potential investors with that in mind, and then. once those expectations are understood between you, like the revenue waterfall basically, which Mike was talking through, of who gets paid what when, then you need a legal contract, and it can be simple, but it needs to lay out credits, it needs to lay out where the money will flow and what order it will flow, and it also needs to lay out editorial and business control, both editorial and business control. So. First of all, do they have input but not control creatively? There's a whole range of ways that people, there can be no involvement creatively, or you can show them, you can have very specific hit points where more money's released. Like, we've shown you a work in progress reel, we've shown you a rough cut, now we get more money. You can give us your input, but we have ultimate editorial control. Some investors may want to have either control or participation in business decisions for the film. Once you finish it, where is it going to sell? Should you take this deal? Is there a better deal out there? And do they want to be part of that conversation or not? So I think all of that can be in a contract.
Jenny, let me ask about a scenario that I think happens where an investor comes in for $100,000 and because there's a budget for $100,000. We're going to make this film for $100,000. And then people go off and make the film, they spend that $100,000, but they're not finished, and now they need another $50,000 to finish. What do you do then?
Well, first, I think that's part of what you have to establish in your original agreement, is whether you have the ability still, in terms of your contract, to continue to raise more money, or if you're making clear that you do need to raise more money. If you have committed to finishing the film for the amount that this person is giving you, then really you should be morally kind of bound to finishing it somehow, come hell or high water for that amount. But if they're giving you the money in the middle of the process, then that happens a lot, and you can reapproach the person and see if they're willing. I mean, I think this is more a matter of what we do at Impact Partners in terms of educating investors about whether they understand that when they give money in the middle of a process of production, it might not be on the time frame that originally, especially for documentaries. I mean, especially if it's a verite film, it's just the story may develop in different ways, or the finishing money, the grant money that's been applied for that seemed so possible might not come through. So at that stage, if that happens, then the investor has to make a decision of whether they want to help you either find other people or raise additional investment, or just let you kind of fly on your own and see if you can finish it. We don't look at projects that are in development. We only look at projects that are either in early production, or post-production. The later, usually the better, because our structure is that we're always the final money into a film. This is part of the protection of the investors. We're always the final money. That doesn't mean that it's a small amount of money necessarily, but it means it's everything that's needed to finish the film. So often that means that we're a little later.
One thing that you allude to is that it's not like it's a short relationship. This is a relationship that is going to go on with your investor for as long as this film is an entity receiving revenue.
Well, I mean, I think it's, we made 3 films by ourselves and did really well with them. And frankly, it's kind of a surprise suddenly when you see someone else's name. They're like, oh, who's that person? Like where were they when I was running through the streets of Baghdad? Or where? I mean, yeah, they weren't there. But at the same time, especially with Impact Partners or some of these other groups like CineReach or whoever, these are people who, they're going to handle, they handle those investors, but they also handle a lot of other things and give you access to things that you may not want to deal with. And so they really become partners in your film. There's another way of looking at it, and I think about this all the time. The larger question is, films do not sell for very much money now. So as you go out and look for money, you really need to think, would I rather just defer and suck it up and eat oatmeal and turn the lights down and really kind of punch through this and not carry the burden of a grant or a loan or equity or whatever, and just do it. And again, it depends on what kind of film it is. I think that if you're going to go out and make The Cove, yeah, you need Impact Partners. There needs to be a vision behind the film. There needs to be a social issues agenda behind the film, all these different components. But I think it's to be realistic about what you want to do with it and what you expect back from it.